It was one of those quiet Sunday afternoons where time feels like it's holding its breath. The sunlight filtered through the curtains in long golden lines, casting warm patterns on the wooden floor. Everything outside moved in slow motion. Birds, coasting lazily, wind brushing the trees with a hush so gentle it barely stirred the leaves. I had just finished giving some reluctant attention to the plants on my windowsill, the same ones that had survived my forgetfulness longer than I deserved. The only sound in the house was the soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of tired floorboards beneath my bare feet. I curled into my favorite reading chair, the one shaped by time and comfort, frayed at the arms, but perfect in the way only an old chair can be. My fingers had just slipped between the pages of a book when a knock came at the door. It wasn't firm, just a hesitant tap, more like a question than a request. I wasn't expecting company, maybe a neighbor, or someone dropping off a package that needed a signature. Opening the door, I found Matthew standing there, my neighbor's son. He wore a faded hoodie and worn jeans, and held a spiral notebook tucked beneath one arm like it might slip away if he didn't cling to it. He shifted his weight from foot to foot, eyes down, shoulders slightly hunched. I hadn't seen much of him since he returned from college for the summer. Always polite, always quiet. The kind of young man who still said, "ma'am," even after you'd told him a dozen times not to. "Hi, Mrs. Parker," he said, glancing up with those deep, cautious, brown eyes that never quite held your gaze for too long. I smiled, softening my voice. "Helen, you're 20 now. I think we can finally drop the Mrs." That earned the faintest smile from him, the kind that flickers and fades too quickly, and he nodded like he was trying not to laugh. "Right, Helen. I was wondering if I could ask you something," he said, shifting nervously. "Of course," I replied, stepping aside. The gentle aroma of coffee and lavender floated from the kitchen, lingering like memory. "Come in, Matthew. Is everything all right?" He paused at the threshold like he wasn't sure if he was allowed to step into someone else's silence. Then he nodded and entered slowly, eyes scanning the room like he was stepping into a memory he wasn't sure belonged to him anymore. "My mom's working," he began, "and I didn't want to bother her. I remember you used to be a teacher." I nodded and led him into the kitchen. I poured him a glass of iced tea and sat across the table. He placed the notebook between us and tapped the cover with uncertain fingers, like it might open on its own and solve everything. "I'm taking a writing course this summer, English comp. We have to write a personal essay about something meaningful, and I don't know how to start. I keep writing, then deleting. I thought maybe you could help. You've lived a life, you know?" That line struck something inside me, a part I didn't even realize had been aching. I hadn't thought of myself as someone with stories worth passing on, not in a long time. I was retired, widowed, mostly talked to my plants or the cashier at the market. But there was something raw in Matthew's voice, a kind of quiet desperation that reminded me what it felt like to be young and adrift. "All right," I said, my voice gentler than I expected. "Tell me what you've got so far." He opened the notebook and flipped through pages filled with scratches, scribbles, and second-guessing. There were notes about his father leaving, about never quite measuring up, about the weight of feelings. He didn't know how to voice. He talked, and I listened. I mean, really listened. And once he started, it all poured out. The class, the pressure, the loneliness that followed him like a shadow since high school. He spoke about never feeling like he truly belonged, not with his friends, not at home, not even in his own skin, sometimes. As he shared more, something shifted. I wasn't seeing the quiet kid from across the fence anymore. I was seeing someone slowly unfolding, revealing parts of himself he didn't know he could show. His voice was mostly steady, but his hands betrayed him, trembling slightly with every page turned. Without thinking, I reached out and placed my hand over his. just for a second. Maybe to calm him. Maybe to say, "You're not alone." He looked up at me then, and I saw it. Gratitude, confusion, maybe even a little hope. And I realized how long it had been since someone looked at me like that. Not just a kind neighbor, not just an older woman who made decent pies, but a person, a whole person, worth something more than memory. The silence that followed was thick with emotion, a silence that could tilt a life in a new direction if you let it. I pulled my hand back gently and offered a small smile. "You're not as lost as you think," I told him. "You just haven't told your truth yet." He swallowed, hard. "How do I even begin?" "You begin," I said. "Right here." I said right here, with this moment, with honesty. And that's exactly what we did. For the next hour, we wrote. Me sharing pieces of my life, not all of them polished, and certainly not all pretty, but every bit of them true. He listened intently, like each sentence I spoke had the power to anchor him. And slowly, something changed. His shoulders relaxed. His pen moved more freely. There was a kind of quiet courage growing in him, right there at my kitchen table. It wasn't just about finishing a class assignment anymore. It was about understanding, about connection. His words weren't perfect, but they were real. And with every sentence he shaped, I saw pieces of himself being stitched together again. Maybe that's what writing really does. It gathers up the frayed edges and gently pulls them closer. When he finally stood to leave, the late afternoon sun had dipped low, casting long amber streaks across the hardwood floor. He hesitated at the doorway, turning back to me with something tender in his expression. "Thank you, Helen," he said quietly. "You don't know how much this meant." I did, though. Maybe not every part of it, but enough to know that this wouldn't be the last time he'd knock on my door, not just for grammar help or advice, but for something that neither of us fully understood yet. And maybe that was the beautiful part. Some of the most important connections in life arrive without explanations or announcements. They simply show up, gentle as a Sunday knock. The next time he came over, the sky was gray and heavy with rain. A soft drizzle painted everything outside in shades of memory. I had just lit a cinnamon candle, the kind that makes a quiet house feel a little less empty, and was halfway through folding laundry when I heard the now familiar knock again. It was just as gentle as before. But this time, I didn't hesitate. I already knew it was him. I opened the door, and there he stood, hood pulled over his head, sleeves damp with rain, eyes soft with apology. "Sorry. I should have called first." "It's fine," I said with a warm smile, stepping aside. "You're always welcome." He slipped off his shoes near the doorway and looked around like he was returning to something that mattered. Maybe it was the way he moved, quiet and careful, or the way he paused before entering the room, as if acknowledging it held more than furniture. Maybe it was me, or maybe it was just that he felt safe here. "I brought something," he said, unzipping his backpack. "I wanted to show you the essay." He handed me a printed page, edges slightly wrinkled from being handled too many times. I settled into the couch and began to read. It was beautiful, not in the polished academic sense, but in the way it breathed truth. He wrote about that first afternoon, the iced tea, the way I listened, even the light through the kitchen window. But what struck me most was the raw honesty. It wasn't crafted to impress. It was written to be heard. When I looked up, he was watching me, his expression unreadable, somewhere between hope and worry. "You have a voice," I said, my fingers resting on the page. "A real one, and it matters." He let out a breath. He'd been holding. I was scared to turn it in. I didn't know if it was too personal. Personal is what makes it powerful, I replied. It's what makes people care. He nodded, then eased down onto the couch beside me, not close enough to invade, but near enough that I could feel the warmth of his presence. The candle flickered beside us, casting shadows across the room while the rain played its rhythm, outside. The silence between us didn't feel empty. It felt full. Full of things unsaid, yet deeply understood. I don't know why, he said softly, but I feel like I can talk to you about anything. That touched something in me, something long tucked away. When you reach a certain age, people stop confiding in you. You become a footnote in their day, the helpful neighbor, the harmless elder, the woman who remembers everyone's birthday but no longer shares her own. But he didn't see me like that. He saw me, really saw me. I reached out and touched his wrist lightly. I'm glad you do. You're safe here. He held my gaze, his eyes lingering just a moment too long. Not in any way troubling, just an awareness, quiet but potent. A shift neither of us named, a line neither of us crossed, but both acknowledged in silence. For the next hour, we talked. About his father, who hadn't called in months. About how invisible he sometimes felt in his own home. I told him about Gerald, my husband, and how the quiet crept in after he passed. The routines that fell away. The kind of loneliness that dresses itself in normalcy so no one asks too many questions. You're not like anyone I know, he said suddenly. And you're not either, I answered, my voice catching just slightly. I replied. That was all I could manage at first. His question hung in the air between us like mist. Uncertain, delicate, real. At some point, he leaned back on the couch, and without even realizing it, I did too. We just sat there, side by side, listening to the soft patter of rain against the windows. There was peace in it. Not the kind that demands quiet, but the kind that gently offers it. No pressure to speak. No need to explain. Just presence. Just two people breathing in sync with the storm outside. Before he left that evening, he turned to me at the door and asked, "Do you think it's weird that we talk like this?" I shook my head slowly. No. I think it's rare. That answer seemed to settle something in him. He smiled, then hesitated, as though caught between impulse and restraint. Can I come by again? Maybe, even if I don't need help with anything? Of course, I said, whenever you want. He stood there for a second longer, like another sentence was right at the edge of his lips but refused to fall. Then he nodded and stepped out into the misty evening. The rain swallowed his footsteps as he disappeared down the walk. I stood in the doorway long after he was gone, wondering what this was becoming. Not just the time we spent, but the space we were creating between us. A space where something unspoken could exist. In a world drowning in noise and distractions, could two people find something meaningful in the silence between words? I didn't know the answer yet. But I was certain of one thing. This wasn't the end of the story. Not by far. The days that followed fell into a rhythm I hadn't expected. Matthew started stopping by every few afternoons. Sometimes he brought a notebook. Sometimes just his quiet, steady presence that somehow filled the room without needing to speak. I didn't question it, not at first. There was a comfort to it, like hearing a familiar song on the radio, when you didn't even know you needed music. One Tuesday evening, I was in the kitchen making pot roast. The house smelled of thyme, garlic, and something like memory. I heard the knock, soft, expected, and took my time answering it. I didn't have to rush anymore. That knock belonged to someone who didn't need permission to be let in. When I opened the door, he was standing there, hands tucked into his jacket pockets, hair tousled from the breeze. His eyes held that soft, searching look I'd come to recognize. He looked older somehow, more settled in himself, but he still carried that boyish hesitation in the way his shoulders curled slightly inward. "Smells good," he said with a crooked grin. "Didn't mean to interrupt dinner." "You didn't," I replied, stepping back. "I made too much anyway." "Sit. You're staying." He didn't argue. We moved easily around each other in the kitchen like old friends or something close to it. I stirred at the stove while he leaned against the counter, talking about class, about his mother's stress, at work, and about the uncertainty that clung to the edges of his future. I listened, offered what little I could. Not answers? Not really. Just space to be heard. Dinner was quiet in the best way. Warm, grounding, familiar. He complimented the meal, said it reminded him of his grandmother's cooking from when he was small. I laughed and told him not to flatter me. I knew full well the roast was a little overdone. Afterward, I made tea. We moved to the couch, the room dim except for the soft overhead light, and the stub of a candle burning low on the table. Outside, the crickets had begun their nighttime song, and the window cracked open just enough to let the cool breeze carry it in. We sat in that quiet for a while, sipping slowly, letting the silence settle. Then, in a voice so low I almost missed it, he spoke. "I feel like I don't know what I'm supposed to become," he said. "Everyone expects something from me, but I'm not even sure I want those things." I turned to him gently. "It's okay not to know. Most people are just pretending they do." He looked at me then. Really looked. His eyes searched mine like they were trying to find a truth buried deeper than the words we'd spoken. "You always know what to say," he murmured. I smiled softly. "That's just age. You start to realize that most questions don't come with neat answers." He nodded slowly, then shifted a little closer. The edge of his knee brushed mine, barely a touch, but enough to remind me. My heart still fluttered. Not with youthful recklessness, but with something quieter, deeper. A feeling that said, "You're still here, still alive." "I've never told anyone this," he said, voice almost a whisper. "But sometimes I feel like I'm not really seen, like people only see what they want from me, not who I actually am." That honesty pierced through me. I reached out without thinking, placed my hand gently over his. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't planned. It was simply human. "I see you, Matthew," I said quietly. He didn't flinch, didn't pull away. He just breathed. Slow, steady, grounded. Then something shifted between us. Not sudden, not explosive, just natural. He turned his hand over, fingers sliding between mine with quiet intent. Our eyes met and lingered, and for a long moment, neither of us said anything. There was no rush to define the moment, no fear pressing at the edges, just presence. A soft, shared stillness. I could have pulled away. Maybe I should have. But I didn't. Because then it wasn't about what the world might say. It wasn't about age or roles or any storyline someone else might assign to us. It was simply about two people finding an unexpected kind of safety in one another. A pause in life's noise where everything made quiet sense. He leaned in slowly, forehead gently resting against mine. His voice was no louder than a breath. "Helen, you make me feel safe. Like I can finally breathe again." I closed my eyes, let the weight of his words settle around me like a soft blanket. "I'm glad," I whispered. That's all I've ever wanted to give you." He didn't leave right away. He stayed. We didn't say much after that, and we didn't need to. The hush of evening crept in around us. Crickets outside, the occasional rustle of leaves, the candle burning low on the table. But none of that mattered as much as the closeness between us, quiet but deeply known. When he finally stood to go, he didn't offer a formal goodbye. No awkward wave or uncertain smile. Just a warm glance and a gentle, "See you soon." And I knew he meant it. Knew he would return. Because whatever this was, whatever name it didn't yet have, it wasn't fleeting. It had weight. It had shape. And we were both holding it carefully, like something too fragile to name just yet. A week passed before I saw him again. Not because something had gone wrong, but because life moves that way, in slow spirals and soft returns. I kept myself busy with little rituals, watering the begonias, folding linens, reorganizing the spice drawer like it mattered. But beneath all that order, my thoughts kept drifting back to that last evening. The way his hand had closed around mine. The sound of his voice saying my name. Not just the words, but the way I felt in them. Alive. Needed. Seen. Then came Friday. Late afternoon light spilled through the garden, and I was outside trimming the hedge when I heard footsteps near the gate. I glanced up, shears in hand, and there he was, Matthew, standing with his hands tucked in his pockets, uncertainty in his stance, but warmth unmistakable in his eyes. "I didn't know if you'd want to see me," he said, voice hesitant. Wiped my hands on my apron and gave him the softest smile. "Of course I do. Come in." We sat on the back porch, the sun slipping behind the trees, casting long amber shadows across the lawn. He looked different that day. Not older, necessarily, but more thoughtful. Like something had been brewing inside him since we last sat together. "I've been thinking a lot," he said. "About the other night. About us." I wrapped my hands around a glass of water, condensation dripping down onto my lap. "It's all right," I said gently. "You don't have to explain anything." "But I want to," he said quickly. "I don't want this to feel like something we tiptoe around." He looked down, studying his hands like the words might be hiding in his palms. "I felt more like myself around you than I have in years. You don't treat me like a problem to solve, or a kid who's lost." "You're not a kid, Matthew," I said quietly. He looked up, his voice firmer now. "And you're not just a kind neighbor who helped me with homework. I see you too. And I've come to care about you. A lot." The breath caught in my throat. Not out of surprise, but because hearing it spoken aloud made it real. And oddly, I didn't feel fear. I didn't feel confusion. I felt peace, simple and still. "Matthew," I said, my voice steady. "This connection. It's real, but it's delicate and complicated. The world may not understand it." "I don't care what the world thinks," he replied. There was no hesitation in him now. "All I know is that when I'm here, when I'm with you, I feel calm. I feel like I belong somewhere." The silence between us stretched out again, but it was different this time. Not awkward, not uncertain, just grounded, thoughtful. I reached across and took his hand, not to claim, not to guide, just to hold, with care, with clarity, with quiet understanding. "I care about you too," I said. "But what matters most to me is that you keep growing, that you become everything you're meant to be." He squeezed my hand lightly, his thumb brushing against mine with a quiet tenderness. I was already beginning to feel it, that soft unfolding inside me. That evening, we didn't cross any lines, and there was no reason to. There was nothing missing. We simply sat there on the porch as the sky melted into hues of pink and gold, as the breeze carried the faint scent of jasmine blooming somewhere beyond the garden fence, as the porch light flickered to life without us noticing until it was already glowing softly beside us. We talked. About his writing. About my old travel. Stories. Places I had seen long before he was born. Places I never thought I'd speak about again. We spoke of the strange, beautiful ways life seems to link people in moments no one plans for, like pieces of different puzzles that still somehow fit. We laughed. We listened. We remembered to breathe. When it was time for him to go, he stood slowly, almost reluctantly. There was a quiet heaviness in the air, not sadness exactly, but a sense of something precious being paused. "I'll be back," he said. I smiled, a warmth blooming in my chest. "I know." He walked down the garden path, his shoes soft, on the stone. Just before disappearing into the twilight, he turned back once, offering me a smile so gentle it felt like a promise. Then he was gone. The evening swallowed his footsteps, and all that remained was the hush of night and the soft glow of the porch light behind me. I stood there long after the last bit of sun had vanished behind the trees. The world was still. The house behind. Me silent. But I didn't feel alone. Not that night. Not anymore. Because whatever it was we had found, whatever name the world might try to give it, was real. Not loud, not scandalous. Just deeply, quietly human. It wasn't about drama. It wasn't about breaking rules. It was about kindness, trust, the kind of connection that slips in like a whisper and stays like a song. It reminded me of something I hadn't let myself believe in for a long time, that even after decades of living, new chapters still wait to be written. That hearts don't retire. They don't forget. They only soften, stretch, and make room for what matters most. Connection doesn't ask about age. It doesn't measure worth in milestones. It only asks one thing of us: to be present, to listen, to be brave enough to let someone see us, and maybe braver still, to see them in return. That's what Matthew gave me. Not a spark, but a quiet fire. The kind that doesn't burn wildly, but glows with steady warmth. The kind that reminds you, softly but clearly, you're still here, and there is still so much left to feel, to give, to live.